look, if you're a guest, there's a QR code in the bulletin. You can scan that and let us know you're here. And we'd love to know that. Look, a few things about today. Today, we have a church conference. We have potluck, which is fantastic. So even if you didn't bring anything, plan on staying. But we've got a lot of things in the fellowship hall because we're getting ready for this garage sale thing. So there's 36 chairs for senior adults in the fellowship hall. We're all going to go through. You'll get your food. And if you're not a senior adult, go to any other classroom on our campus and eat. And in about 25 minutes after we start, we're going to meet in here for the conference. So just to let you, if you have kids, the reason we don't really want their kids inside the fellowship hall is there's a bunch of things that are in there for your children to get in trouble in. So we figured it'd probably be better for our seniors to stay there. Should be plenty of food. If not, I mean, God always rations and he can extend, so hope you'll do that. College students, please stay for that. And then college students next week, and for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be having lunch at people's homes. We'll have the information in the bulletin, but I hope that you'll join us there. And on August the 9th, that's when Jacob Keats, our potential university minister, is going to be here. We'll meet at someone's house for lunch for college students there, but then from 4 to 6 that night, we'd like for you to come back, bring some homemade ice cream, or pick it up. Brahms is fine, whatever. And we'll just have kind of a fellowship. Kids have an activity. Later on, the deacons have an activity. Jacob will be around. We'll just kind of hang out and get a chance to see him. And on August the 6th, that's the Thursday, from 6 to 8 at the Hub, we'll have open pickleball. So if you want to come and meet Jacob, you can show him what pickleball is. I'm not sure that he knows that. So anyway, there's that. We're working on something this year, and that's to be known for what we love, not for what we hate. And I mentioned this kind of garage sale thing. Over half the fellowship hall is filled up with stuff. On August the 15th, we're going to have this free giveaway. We've been telling international students, we've moved about 25 international students so far. They're overwhelmed. And I'm just here to tell you, moving someone who's here for 2 years and they barely have enough stuff to put in a pickup truck, just shows you how little that they have and what they need, and they're just overwhelmed. We've already had probably 10 college students come by and get stuff, and it's amazing. Stuff is left, but there still ends up being more stuff. And so outside in the foyer, there's a sign-up sheet. We'll end up kind of getting a head person over each of those areas, but we'll need greeters, which all that means is when people come in, what do? You smile and greet them. It's really simple. We'll have some bottled water, and we'll have some coffee and tea, and then if you sign up for that, that means you just freely give out coffee and tea. We have some people that will be here from 6 to 8 a.m., and we're going to move some things from the fellowship hall to outside. There'll be a sign-up sheet for people to actually put things in trucks so we can take them to their places. So if you fill in and decide to sign up, all you basically do is show up during that time. We'll tell you what you do, and as long as you have a willing heart, willing to do anything, we'll put you to work. But we're hoping to get rid of everything, and if not, at 1:30, Super Thrift's going to show up and load up their vehicles, and we're going to make sure we're going to share that stuff with other people. And then if it works out well, on August the 17th, we're going to start redoing the floor in the fellowship hall. So it's a good time to mess it up right now so this replaced then. But we want to be known for what we love, not for what we hate. This morning we're going to be in Haggai, chapter 2, verses 1 to 9. Appreciate Emma for reading that. Last week we finished up chapter 1. If you were here, and we learned a simple lesson that the nation of Israel, they've gotten back to the land. They were in Babylon. They've been allowed to come back. About 50,000 Jews came back. They had a governor. They had a high priest that was there. But the nation stopped doing something for 16 years. They were supposed to have rebuilt the temple. They started, the foundation was laid, and then they quit. They were lazy. They were complacent. So if I had a life lesson from chapter 1 to apply to us, I think it would be this one. Don't be an apathetic Christian. The challenge of apathetic Christianity. It's probably one that goes against our reputation as Christians in the world. We typically are known for what we hate, not for what we love. It's one thing for an unbeliever to be apathetic. I've encountered that when we lived in Australia for 5 years. That was an apathetic culture. The unbelievers didn't care anything about Christ because they didn't need Christ. It was beautiful outside. They'd rather go for a surf or do something different rather than talking about their need for life. An apathetic unbeliever I get, but an apathetic Christian, I think that's something that probably makes God gag. It's what should not be. See, disciplers are action takers. We're convicted. We're supposed to respond appropriately. We're supposed to be known for what we love in a positive way. This morning, we're going to explore this further. We're going to look at the danger of comparison. We're going to talk about misplaced or false memories and to discuss our future value. Again, Haggai is a prophet. Remember, he's speaking the words of God to a people of God. He's trying to encourage them. He says over and over, this is what God says. This is not me. This is what God is saying. He's addressing those who are back into the land. They came back under Zerubbabel, that 50,000. They have Joshua, the high priest there. And now in chapter 2, he's going to deal with complacency with his second audience. The first audience he addressed was just Zerubbabel and the high priest Joshua. And now he's going to talk to the Jewish men or the remnant that's there of Israel. And in verse 1, we learn the time frame. It's the 21st day of the 7th month. Now, though the number of days in the Jewish calendar vary based upon the moon cycle, we'll just say there's 30 days in a basic month. We left the nation of Israel back in chapter 1, verse 15, on the 24th day of the 6th month. And so now we're at the 21st day of the 7th month. So about a month later, now is when Haggai is giving this next kind of prophecy. Remember, it took 23 days for them to prepare. Haggai had said, look, go to the mountains, go get the wood. It took probably 23 days for them to gather the wood. They've now brought it back. They've started to rebuild the temple. And about a month later, they hit a roadblock. They seem to get into trouble. So in verse 2, God speaks to Haggai and says, hey, give a second message. Give it to Zerubbabel, the governor. Give it to Joshua, the high priest. And give it to all the guys, the Jewish men that are there, the remnant, those approximately 50,000 Jews who returned to the land. Not all the Jews, remember, came back. In Babylon, they had it really easy. They had the opportunity to come back, but many people wanted to stay in Babylon because it was nice. They had their own homes. It was pretty nice. But these 50,000, they came back. They came back to the land. And I think they came back out of obedience to God. They knew that's where they were supposed to be. They believed themselves and Jews as a nation were meant to occupy the land that God promised. Remember that land flowing with milk and honey? So they returned. And I think they probably returned very spiritual, right? I mean, knowing this is where we're supposed to be, God wants us here. They had Zerubbabel, the governor. They had Joshua, the high priest, to lead them and encourage them. And they did really well for a while. And then what happens to us? Reality sets in. I mean, the land didn't respond. They had to start back from scratch. Remember, there wasn't a stone left standing. When Babylon left there, they tore down the temple. They tore down the walls. So these spiritually motivated individuals have now lost hope. And for 16 years, they've been passive. They went back to building their own homes, and those homes looked very nice. That was a place of safety, a place of comfort. Maybe they started regretting they ever came back to the land. I think they're probably second-guessing themselves, second-guessing their decisions, second-guessing the life and the energy and the time they put into this dry, difficult place, this called Jerusalem now. But it's just like us, isn't it? We start things. We believe God wants us to do something, whether it's memorizing scripture or taking a new ministry or a new job or whatever. And for a while it goes all right, but then life hits. It's not as easy as you thought it would be. It's difficult, and so you stop. You find yourself discouraged. The Jews that returned, that's where they were in chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1, for about 30 days, Haggai kicked them in gear. They were doing okay. But once again, after a few weeks, it's no longer fun. Days have become weeks. Being consistent isn't nearly as fun. And so God says, Haggai, you need to cheer the troops again. So he addresses the challenge of comparison. I'll say a little phrase, never judge a book by its cover. Comparison is one of the most dangerous things we can do in our society, whether you're trying to keep up with the Kardashians or the Real Wives of whatever, or you just listen to Negative Nelly, whoever that is in your life. We get sucked into this comparison game, and it's destructive. We place value on others by comparison. We place value on ourselves by comparison. We place future value based upon comparison. And the world doesn't help us. They push us to comparison and dissatisfaction. Think of the last time you heard a commercial that said something like, hey, be satisfied. You don't need anything. Stay right where you are. Save onto that money. Be content. No, it's the latest this and that. I didn't realize how discontent I was until I saw commercials. And then I realized, man, I'm pitiful. I need a lot of help, right? You got to go out and buy stuff. It's the latest thing. The Jews returned to Jerusalem, and evidently, I think they're getting caught up into the comparison game, and so Haggai gives them a pep talk. He starts in verse 3 with some rhetorical questions. Those are questions that it's really an obvious answer that he's asking, and the way he asks them, he's highlighting a few issues. So the first one is challenge number 1, and that's comparison of the past. He basically goes, hey, does anyone here remember the temple, the old temple, in its former glory? Years earlier, before the destruction of Jerusalem, do you remember what that temple looked like? There could have been somebody who might remember Solomon's temple. Some think Haggai might have seen it. He's asking that question, do you remember the temple in its former glory? They're just 30 days into building. I mean, maybe the frame's up. It's starting to get a little serviceable. They're seeing few things coming to fruition. And so he attacks right up front this danger of comparison. So first of all, there's a danger in comparing the past that was seen. If someone who's now currently in Jerusalem had remembered Solomon's temple, they would only have vague memories. But let's go back to that mighty temple for a moment. I want you to think about Solomon's temple. You can see it in detail in 1 Kings chapter 6 and 7. But it took Solomon 7 years to build the mighty temple. He used over 30,000 forced laborers, 70,000 people who transported wood and things, 80,000 people who hewed the stones. They had 3,300 general contractors. That's larger than we did for Boone Pickens and the Google Center out there. They used over 200,000 people to rebuild the temple before it was stripped and destroyed. And the result was amazing. The cedar and cypress wood throughout had these carvings of gourds and flowers that were all overlaid with pure gold. The temple itself overlaid with pure gold. The altar, the inner sanctuary, overlaid with pure gold. The floor of the temple overlaid with pure gold. The doors of olive wood had these carved cherubim and palm trees and flowers, all overlaid with pure gold. Think of the nicest, the most amazing place you've ever been to, whether it's a church or St. Peter's Basilica or whatever, would pale in comparison to how amazing Solomon's temple would have been. It would glitter in the sun. It would stand out as a beacon. It would be amazing. And even if no one was alive, whenever Haggai's addressing, they would remember the stories of the past. They remember maybe what their parents said about this amazing, incredible temple. And now you have 50,000 people that return to the land, not the 200,000 workers. They haven't spent 7 years. They've spent 30 days. This ragtag group looks around and goes, boy, this is nothing like what it used to be. This isn't the first time, by the way, they stopped. In the book of Ezra, it talks about when they started to rebuild the foundation. Look what happened 16 years earlier in Ezra chapter 3, verse 11. They began to build the foundation. They sang, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, saying, for he is good, for his loving kindness is upon Israel forever. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. I wish it stopped right there. Verse 12, yet many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' households, the old men who'd seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of the house was laid before their eyes, while many shouted aloud for joy. See, the past crippled some. They couldn't experience joy because of the past. They couldn't experience joy in the present because they kept comparing the past with the present. So beware in the danger of comparing to the past. But there's also another danger. Beware the past that is imagined as a misplaced memory. We might say a false memory or an embellished memory, where the longer we get away from something, it's amazing, our memory changes it. Did you ever have those memories that seem to be better or worse? Or stories you hear from your parents or your grandparents, and they shift over time? We do that. And some of that has crippled us from moving forward because we're actually comparing ourselves with something that is a misplaced memory. It's not even reality. In the Australian version of Psychology Today, and why wouldn't you be reading that? I'm going to read this quote. It says, strong evidence suggests that memories are much more quite complex, highly subject to change, and often simply unreliable. Memories of past events can be reconstructed as people age or as their worldview changes. People regularly recall childhood events falsely. Isn't that amazing? See, most of the 50,000 Jews who returned wouldn't have seen the first temple. That's obvious. But now they're comparing what they're doing with something they never saw, something they've imagined how great this was, and they're comparing what they're currently doing with something that might not even have been a reality. And the result is the past is devalued or elevated, and it negatively affects the present. In other words, we overvalue what we remember or we devalue what we remember in the past, and it hinders us from moving forward in the present. We get stuck. We don't have all the information to even evaluate, and yet some of us this morning, we're living our lives on the supposed expectation of someone like our parents. Did you ever notice that even sometimes when your parents have long since passed, you sometimes hear them saying things to you, and that's not even reality? And you're still bent on thinking the way that you think that they thought and what you think they wanted you to do, and you're living your life on this, I think they would have done this situation. It's crippling. So remember, the past is history, but the present focus on Christ is our reality. Some of us this morning might be so stuck in the past like those there in Jerusalem, you can't even live in the present. We have to move away from these comparisons and focus on Christ in the present. And it seems like the Jews in Jerusalem, they're stuck on some image in the past. They didn't even see the temple, most of them. They're only valuing what they remember or were told. And the reality is, though Solomon spent 7 years on the temple, which seems amazing, he spent 13 years on his own palace. And though the temple was amazing, a place of spiritual focus, Solomon himself, he managed to have 1,000 wives and concubines, and their gods distracted him from their focus. So though the temple was gorgeous to look at, it didn't keep the nation of Israel from splitting in 930 BC. It didn't keep them from being under siege. It didn't keep them from being destroyed as a nation. They only remembered the past positive things. Probably had a strong sense of embellishment. So when these workers, they look at the 30 days of work, they're building on the foundation that started for 16 years and stopped. It stifled their creativity. It hindered their ability to focus in the present. I know believers who are still so stuck in the past, maybe because of a past indiscretion or maybe a sin or a failure, a past temptation or lack of motivation, and they're stuck. They just can't get past it. And therefore, they keep doing the same thing in the same way, and they're still stuck. And if that's you, maybe I need to lovingly say, hey, the past is history. In this present, this moment in time, with your present family, with your present friends, focusing on Christ, let the past be the past. And maybe you need to have this application. Confess it, and then give yourself a break. I mean, yes, if it was a sin, should we agree with God that it's wrong? Yes. Should we change our mind? Yes. Should we also move forward? Absolutely, yes. Move on. Give yourself a break. I understand there might be some lingering consequences, but many of us are still stuck in some paralyzed position of the past. You can't move forward. Confess it, give yourself a break, and move forward in the present focused on Christ. So there's a danger, a challenge of comparing ourselves with the past. We see it here. There's also a danger of comparison to the present. In verse 4, there's another question. Haggai goes, well, what do you see now? I mean, that really pushes the nation to see what they've done so far. And so far, after 30 days, let's be honest, it probably doesn't look great. I mean, they left nicer homes in Babylon. They left nicer synagogues. This has a feeling of a step down. Have you ever felt that? It's like having to move from a 5-bedroom home to a 2-bedroom townhome. Trading in your, never had one of these, a 2026 Audi Q8 luxury sedan for a 1992 Saturn, right? I mean, that feels like a step down because we compare it with something we just had in the present. That's like looking around at your neighbors, your friends. You're comparing your situations with them. That'll stop you in the present just as much as it will when you focus on the past. It's a failure to appreciate what you have in the present because I think we're failing to focus on Christ in the present. And the result is we focus our energy then on bringing others down instead of improving ourselves. Because typically the only way we feel better about ourselves is if those around us have a failure. And then we feel better. Because if that's who we're comparing ourselves with, if other people fall, by the way, that's why tabloids work so well. Prince Harry, the monarchy, King Charles, the fall of a pastor, a political figure, a president, we go, ha, they got theirs, right? We feel better about ourselves. When we compare ourselves with others rather than Christ, we are in a heap of trouble. We allow others to drive our behavior, we allow others to set our standard for life, and it's crippling. So remember this: fame, buildings, job, size, and scope do not determine value to God. Warren Buffett says it this way. He says the big question about how people behave is whether they have an inner scorecard or an outer scorecard. It helps if you can be satisfied with an inner scorecard. In other words, when you compare yourselves to others, you will always lose. You'll always be on the bad end of the situation. You're chasing a game you can never win. And even as a church, as believers, we have to beware of comparing ourselves with others on things like buildings, people, wealth. That's the question pastors always ask when they get together. How big's your church? How many people you got? How much money you got? That's just a silly, dumb question. And that's why I think God is highlighting here with Haggai the danger of comparison. Just because something is big does not mean it has value. It might in the eyes of the world, but doesn't necessarily mean in the eyes of God. Size and scope do not mean something is undervalued. The external does not mean that something is valued. Here God's told his people, hey, build the temple. And they are. And they quit building it because they think it no longer has value. The problem is God didn't tell them to quit. God didn't look at the temple and go, you guys are pitiful. You guys just might as well quit. He never discouraged them. He never told them to stop. He didn't say there wasn't value, and he didn't start comparing. I was reminded of the challenge of this eternal perspective and Christ-like focus from my mentor, Kenneth Boa, who lives in Atlanta. And upon our decision to move to Australia, I was struggling with a couple things. And so he sent me an email of comfort and advice, and I'm not sure he really realized the impact it made in my life. Among other things, he wrote these 3 things on a postcard. He said, the more we crave the next world, the less we covet this world. True fame is not in cognition, but in reception. Fame with God and through the grace of usually anonymous mutual reception. And then he wrote these next words. He says, Rodney, I've come to perceive a biblical view of fame, not as a matter of how many know you or your name. Instead, it resides in the organic dynamic of reception by other of Christ in you and through you. Thus, fame in this sense is consistent with earthbound anonymity. In other words, Ken Bo highlighted a truth in his own fluent language, probably one that the Jews in Jerusalem needed to hear. I certainly needed to hear. Fame is not based on what you have. Fame is not based on how popular you are. Fame is not based on the size of the church, a company, or a family. Biblical fame is the perspective that God values when others see Christ in you. That is the only thing that matters. Do others see Christ in you? That's value. Beware of comparing yourself with the things of the past. Beware of comparing yourself with others of the present. And then challenge number 3, beware of the comparison of the future. It's almost now you have this dreamy-eyed teenager writing down the list of things. You may have done this, that you wanted in a spouse. You're looking for your Prince Charming. You're looking for your beauty, your Cinderella. And yet in the present, it's amazing that no one's developing skills. So there'll be the man or woman who becomes the Cinderella or the Prince Charming. In verse 4, I think it's important because in verse 4, God gives the people some encouragement. Take courage. The phrase take courage means to grasp, to get a hold of, to get a firm grip, to stand fast. And then he calls them all out. Zerubbabel, take courage, which implies he might have been doubting. Joshua, take courage. He's probably been doubting. All the people of the land, take courage, which implies they've been doubting. But get a hold of it. Don't just contemplate it. Get a hold of it and work, he says, And then he says, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. He uses that phrase multiple times through verse 9. That phrase, Lord of hosts, basically means the God of all troops. Whether it's heavenly or earthly, it's often used of warfare. God's telling the nation, you can take courage because your work has a purpose in the present. Realizing that Christ is our commander, you're okay. Move forward. And the result is we end up dreaming sometimes of a future without putting in work in the present. We keep thinking about what we want to be and where we want to go and what we hope to have. But in order to enjoy the benefits of the future, it means you have to work in the present. The dream house you want to build doesn't build itself. You spend hours dreaming and planning, months building, months just to get it right so you can supposedly live it in the next 50 years or until someone gives you a really nice offer, right? My parents just celebrated living 51 years in their current house. I can remember moving there in the summer of 1975 as a young 5-year-old, preparing for my first year in kindergarten in McCord School. Today, when I go by, the house has expanded. And where there were no trees, there's now some big trees. Where there are open fields, there's now cattle and goats, a garden. Where there were no neighbors to the south, there's an entire neighborhood. But it didn't happen overnight. It was a step-by-step plan of work while you lived with something greater in mind. So in verses 5 through 9, God, through Haggai, gives the Jews some encouragement. He pushes the idea of something even better in the future. You're working now so that something better in the future can happen, something they can look forward to. And in verse 5, God reminds them of a promise he made to the nation. Years ago, miraculously, he took them out of Egypt. And that's probably an appropriate way, by the way, to review your past, is you look at God's faithfulness to the past, not your experiences. Think in the past, how was God faithful to me? And there's a 4-verse tirade here. He has of heavens being shaken and the sea and the land. He talks about the nations being shaken and a bunch of people bringing in wealth and all this silver and gold are God's. And he ends up with the latter or the future glory of the temple will be greater than the past or the present. It'll be a place of peace. You go, what in the world is going on here? There's a sense that the temple they're currently building, he could be referring to that. It's one that Herod's going to expand. And it could be saying that, hey, do you realize what you're doing now, understanding where we're at in the 500 BCs, a few years later, guess who's going to show up in the temple? Jesus Christ himself. And in essence, he could be saying, guys, do you realize that God himself is going to show up in the temple and it's going to be good enough for Jesus, and you guys here are moaning about what you're doing and saying it's not good enough. And though I think that's true, I don't think that's what he's specifically referring to. I think he's talking about a glimpse of a much better future. Because the events mentioned in verses 6 through 9 seem to refer of, I think, the second coming of Christ. It's very similar to what Matthew wrote in Matthew 24, 29, and 30. He says, but immediately after the tribulation of these days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the power of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and glory. After the tribulation, Jesus is going to return. We see those details in Revelation 19. And after Christ returns, he's going to rule and reign on the throne of David for 1,000 years in the millennial temple. It's not going to get more glorious than that. The one who is life and light will be there ruling and reigning. I think that's ultimately what Haggai is getting them to look forward to, is that this is a glimpse of something that's greater. And yes, Jesus is going to be in this temple, but there's an even greater one that is reflecting towards. So remember this, your present circumstances do not signify future value. So just because we see now doesn't mean that there's not a future value. What they're looking at right now doesn't mean that's the only value. And for us, we might say our present circumstances, whether good or bad, doesn't necessarily reflect your future value. Or we might say we need to live with the end in mind, keep that eternal perspective. That's the key to staying away from the challenge of comparison, which I think leads to a very simple conclusion. And it's one we keep coming back to in Haggai. The conclusion is, do what you know you should be doing today. Specifically from an eternal perspective, what is it that you know God wants you to be doing? And if you're not doing it, start doing it. If you know you should be accomplishing something, accomplish it. That's where you start. That's the reason we can have strength and encouragement, is because God is with us. And as we're serving, we're looking towards something that has greater value in the future. So we're not comparing ourselves with the past. We're not comparing ourselves with the present. And we're not stagnant in the present to move towards the future. We realize as we work and we put our hands to the plow that there's going to be a future value. So our second application, start something today you know you should be doing. Now that's generic, that should be easy, but there ought to be something in your life that you know you should be doing. Something that's going to be a benefit, whether it's to you individually, to your family, to your relation with God. It can be something as simple as memorizing Scripture now, so in the future, we see a value when you don't have a Bible. Have you ever been around somebody, you start to have a conversation, and you say something like, I know in the Bible somewhere it says that. Wouldn't it be a whole lot better just to go, man, there's some truth here. John 3:14-18 is pretty amazing. And just be able to engage in a conversation. Or it's in the disciplines of Bible study now that in the future we have the knowledge to apply the Bible to our situation. Or it's the fellowship that we have now as a body of believers that later on when we have challenges, we don't actually feel all alone. It's our focus on Christ now that keeps us from comparing ourselves to others. So just like the Jews in Jerusalem, go back and pick up that pickaxe, go back to your job, go back to your studies, and do the things you know you need to be doing. And don't think about value as man thinks about it. Focus on Christ, knowing that with great hope that true value, true fame, a true perspective is that others see Christ in you no matter what you do. A challenging, fun application. Let's pray. Gracious Father, Lord, I thank you for this morning. Lord, I just pray that, Lord, you would kick us in the backside of something we know we need to be doing. Lord, I pray that we would accomplish it, whether it's in school or it's our family, whether it's in our relationships with our spouse or it's in the church, if it's in Bible study or memorization, that we would start something that you've been laying on our heart and do it well. And Lord, keep us from comparing. Keep us from being stuck in the past. We're only thinking about the future without putting the work in. Help us to be a group of believers that puts the hand to the plow, focuses on you, and does our best to show the world not who we are, but who you are. Pray this most precious name. Amen.